Hi, friends, and welcome to another episode of the I Owe It to Myself podcast. I'm super excited about this episode because we are diving into the ACOTAR series. And so this is the beginning of many episodes that will cover all 5 books in the overall ACOTAR series by Sarah J. Maas. For context, if this is your first episode of mine that you are diving into and you haven't listened to anything else that I've done before, I have read this series before. And I'm doing a full reread before the book comes out in October, as well as the second book that's coming out in January. That being said, while this is a read-along series, I do want to make sure that it is very clear that because I have read this before, there are going to be things that I will probably be talking about that are going to be spoilers. And I know that that may not be what somebody listening to this or wanting to do a read-along series is looking for, especially if you're reading it for the first time. So I will make sure to caveat that at the beginning of every episode for every single episode that I do for the entire ACOTAR reread. And I will be sure to put that in my social media captions and episode descriptions because I don't want to ruin the experience for anybody. But I can't do my reread properly without explaining the fact that it's a reread, owning the fact that it's a reread, and then also being aware that likely I will speak to spoilers. So that is your fair warning if you are reading ACOTAR for the first time and listening to these episodes. All of that to say, this is going to be the first episode out of 3 for our read-along series for the first book, which is A Court of Thorns and Roses. As far as where I want to start, I want to also speak to the fact that Sarah J. Maas is one of my favorite authors, and her books are by far my favorite series that I have read so far. There are many books and many series that I have read and come across in my life so far, and I'm very privileged to be able to say that. But ACOTAR was the series for me that I read around the time of COVID. I had not been a regular avid reader in many, many years. I loved to read when I was a kid, and I was really rather infatuated with books and like having a collection, even though my collection was small. Like I just loved the idea of all of it. And then pretty much from I would say honestly middle school, maybe even early high school, up until COVID, which was a solid 8 to 10 plus years, I wasn't really reading regularly at all. And so to pick up a series like ACOTAR and for that to be the series that brought me back into reading, it is just special to me. And I also think that the way in which Sarah J. Maas writes really is a style that I appreciate. And I think that there is a lot of genius in her writing. And so it's not just the fact that it brought me back into reading as an adult, but just the way in which that she writes in general, I have a lot of appreciation for. So I want to say all of that too, because for those listening, I don't want to sugarcoat the fact that I am a big fan, so I am rather biased. And I think that it's only fair that I say that. With that, what is interesting for me that I want to speak on rather quickly before I dive into my thoughts on the story so far is that even though I've read this already, I don't feel like so far I'm having a different reaction to what I'm reading because I have already read it. When I start to talk about my thoughts in regard to what I've read in the first 15 chapters, maybe that will make more sense, but I don't feel like I'm seeing anybody differently. I already know what comes for Feyre. I already know what comes for Tamlin and for her sisters, but as I'm reading it right now, I'm not feeling any kind of way. It's almost like I'm reading it again for the first time, yet I know what's to come. But it's hard for me to explain it. And so I'm both aware of that, but also excited by the fact that I don't, so far in these first 15 chapters, I don't feel biased in any kind of way. And I think it's important to point that out because after the first book, people feel some kind of way about Tamlin. If you haven't seen that on social media or whatnot, just know that there are certainly strong feelings about him. And I do fall in the camp where he is not one of my favorite characters. But even still, when I'm reading these pages, I don't find myself having bias in the sense of his interactions with Feyre or any part that he's playing so far of me being like annoyed by it or already turned off by it. I really don't feel anything. And I say that with such excitement because I think it makes me excited that I'm going to really be able to go in still very open-minded to this series and to this reread, which I think is important. And I just didn't know. I did not know what my reaction would be or how I would feel about these characters and coming back into reading these stories again. But again, because it is stories that I do enjoy and characters that I have really liked and an author that I really like their writing style of, I did expect a little bit that I might feel some kind of way. And I think I had some nervousness about coming back to this read along, and I'm just not feeling that. So that dialogue and that idea may come out a lot in the episodes that I do, not only for this first book, but for all of the books. And I'm sure that I will mention it or bring it up again, but obviously this being the first episode, I definitely wanted to mention it because I just find it very interesting. So moving on, let's go ahead and talk about what has gone down in these chapters and where my head is at. One thing that I'll quickly say before I go ahead and do that is I've been finding that my processing of information and the way that I go about these episodes works a little bit better when I'm able to just talk about the characters rather than the story in the order of which everything happens. So this is not going to be a chronological digestion of what I have read. It's just going to be about the characters in general. And so therefore we're going to hop around a little bit, and it will likely be that way for all of the episodes that I do. So I just want to explain that and comment on that. That is my style of podcasting. Anyway, now let's get to the good stuff. I want to talk about the sisters for a second. And so I guess I am starting at the place of the beginning of the book, but we'll just call it coincidence. And the reason why I want to start there is because my first thought of what I want to talk about goes to Nesta. And so far in these 15 chapters, they, being Nesta and Elaine, are only in the beginning portion of this book thus far. I was reading and I was just moving along through the pages and the chapters just fine. Not a ton of stuff is really happening in some of those early chapters, because we're just getting the lay of the land, right? Of who Feyre is and what her family dynamics are and her role in that family, the environment in which they live in, all of that kind of stuff. And because I've read this before, I of course knew that we were going to be greeted with Nesta and that she is just very unlikable. She, to me, is a pretty hard character to take in the books for a while. And so I knew that, and there was a little bit of like a nails on chalkboard kind of feeling when her moments would come up, when she would have any dialogue with Feyre. Like, she's so nasty. She comes across as being so self-centered that I don't have a lot of favor for her. But I bring it up because, again, even though I knew what was going to go down, when we get to the moment where they are all in the house and the beast comes to the house to take Feyre, who we now know is Tamlin, there is that moment where Nesta is protecting Elaine. From that point in the story where Feyre is in her inner monologue explaining what the situation is and how Nesta is kind of protecting Elaine, the look she has on her face, and then like what Feyre is thinking, the dialogue that she has with her father, and just talking to her sisters in general, across how many other sentences that all of that went down, it made me emotional. And I remember in the moment, I was so caught off guard by getting like a frog in my throat at that moment. And I've thought about it since, because I read these chapters 1 through 15 over a couple of days. And I was thinking about it this morning, like, why is that? Because again, I'm not really feeling any kind of way, but at the same time, I do know what is to come. So why would I feel emotional about this situation with Feyre and her sisters in this house? It may be emotional because of the fact that Nesta is hard to take. And because of that, realizing this is the first time that we start to see the reality of who Nesta actually is. It's not really said as much from Feyre's perspective. She isn't dissecting this moment. But as a reader, I think what was potentially going on for me, unbeknownst to me, is that the annoying pieces of what you see of Nesta and her cruelty and just how angry she is all just a mask. And she really doesn't want to be that person. And she really maybe has never had any choice in the matter. Her circumstances, her living situation, her parental situation, whatever it is, has put her into this place of being the kind of person that we see. And so in the moment where there's life or death on the line and her instinct is not to cower or hide, but to protect Elaine, it's very touching when you think about it. To see a character like that who is so self-centered and so like holier than thou in ways that she really doesn't deserve to be, to then be willing to seemingly do a lot of things to protect somebody that she truly loves. In this case, that's Elaine. It really just kind of sheds light on who she actually is. And so in the moment of that all happening, it's a very quick interaction. It's a very quick moment where this happens, where we see Feyre's inner monologue. As I mentioned, like it's a couple of sentences, I think, and we move on down the road with the story. And from that point of when that happens in the book through chapter 15, we don't see Nesta and Elaine again. And so for somebody who's reading it for the first time, it's probably just a small moment. But I think it stood out to me now almost because of the fact that I know what's going to happen, that it was this realization that that was a peek into the reality of who Nesta actually is. Albeit we have to go through a lot to get there. And even in where we end up at the end of this series, I think there's far much more to her, which I will certainly talk about in future episodes and when we get into those books later in the series. But I don't know. I think that is my thought as to why it was that it made me emotional in this moment of all of this happening. Because really, I don't know that I necessarily have strong feelings about the fact of her situation with her father. You could say that there's empathy there for the fact that he was once a successful man and he's now battered and broken and he's without his wife and his daughter is here in danger being taken away to the fairylands. Like, you could certainly feel something for him. And as empathetic as I am, I don't actually think that I really was having any feelings towards him as a character in that moment. I wasn't feeling what I would usually feel in terms of like a paternal, that conflicted emotion between the father and the daughter. I don't think that I was really reacting to that because I think I'm a little untied to him as a character. Despite knowing the role that he plays later down the line in the series, I just don't think that was as much of the situation for me. I could be naive about that fact, but I think it really was more the dynamic of the sisters and the moment of what is happening here with Nesta. And what's interesting about that is because Feyre does mention her sisters in her inner monologue through some of these other chapters. Not a lot, but it does come up. And there's a moment where I don't remember exactly, but she's saying something in regard to Nesta. And I think about like her cruelty towards Feyre. It's just some thought, a little quip, whatever. And so you're kind of brought back to the fact that Nesta is not a positive character. That even though Feyre knows that she's her sister and she's her family, that she is mean, right? And so you as a reader, when you're going through for the first time, I can see how you're really just holding on to that part of her. And maybe it is because of the context that I have of what goes down over the entire series that I'm able to look at that moment of Feyre being taken and have a little bit more emotion in regard to the Nesta that we see. Not entirely sure, and because I'm not sure, it's hard for me to put sound thoughts around it, but that is the best thing that I can come up with. The way in which I've summarized it is the best way in which I can even try to explain what I think was happening in that moment, because again, I was pretty caught off guard that I got emotional so early into the book about this quick moment. Outside of that, a lot of the rest of these chapters is Feyre's time in the Spring Court and getting to know Lucien and Tamlin. And what I find interesting is that when I think about this series and I think about Lucien as a character, I don't actually know off of the cuff of how I would describe him. I was trying to think of like, who could I compare him to in the way that I understand him now, having read all of these books. And I don't know that I really have an answer in terms of how he sits for me, if there was a way in which I was going to try to compare him to something to exemplify how I feel about him. But what I can say is that the Lucien that we see in these early chapters of this book, and obviously early on in this series overall, he is so different. He is so specific. He stands out in such an obvious way to me that it kind of irks me. Like, I almost forgot that Lucien had so much like I am holier than thou. It's in a different way than Nesta does. It's pompous. It's like, you should worship us as high fae, and worship's probably the wrong word, but it's like, you should revere us. You should have respect. You really do have every right to fear us because of what we can do. Like, they are not apologetic or shy about being clear that they are high fae. And he very much comes off with this air of ego. And we see very early on that Feyre is very much clocking the same thing and commenting on it, like just the audacity, basically, right? But what is interesting about that is in these earlier chapters, Feyre connects with Lucien more quickly than she does with Tamlin. Like, there just seems to be this ease that she has around him. And she even says at one point to Tamlin, like, I know who Lucien is. I know where to peg him and how to read him and how to understand him, because he isn't hiding. He is not apologetic about who he is. I think that she's interpreting then that the way that he is and what he's showing forth is just so audacious that it can't be anything but his nature. And I think that that is a little bit wrong, because again, having known where we get with Lucien and where his character is in later books in terms of just his development and the way in which that we see him as a reader, I think it actually is very much the same as Nesta. Feyre thinks in this moment that she's getting like the true Lucien. I don't actually think that she is. I think in some ways that she is, but I think that it's also this mask. It's like they have been doing this same thing for so long in terms of like being in these courts and posturing and trying to defend and trying to do whatever it is that they've been doing for literally decades and for many, many, many years, that I can imagine that he has put up a little bit of this wall and this act as the emissary for Tamlin too, that his mask, quote unquote, that he wears during professional duties kind of blends in with his personality. And so we think that that's who Lucien is, but I would almost argue again the same thing as Nesta, where like the reality of who he is different, and that this is kind of this survival mechanism. Yet there's enough truth in it and enough unapologeticness in it that Feyre is willing to kind of open up to him, or at least lean a little bit more towards Lucien earlier in the story. I think what also makes a lot of sense out of that, though, is because we know, again, where he ends up in the long run. And because him and Feyre have a, for the most part, positive relationship in the future of the series, it actually makes a lot of sense that they would connect early on. But I tangented a little bit there to kind of bring that back full circle to them as characters in their relationship to each other. But my main point is just that the showiness of Lucien and his ego, I have forgotten about. He really does not remain that kind of character. In this moment, I don't recall him as that kind of character in the long run. And so we will see. Maybe I will change my tune of how I remember him. Maybe I'm misremembering him, or maybe the way in which I remember him after this reread will evolve. But from where I stand now, it just feels so different. As much as he can kind of also be annoying in his own ways, it's just kind of funny for me to notice how like loud and boisterous he seems to be compared to the impression and interpretation I had of him prior to doing this reread. Now we get to Tamlin. I will say that in these early pages, I don't have a ton to say in regard to him. I think that it is a little bit intentional that we don't have a big read on him because Feyre doesn't have a big read on him, right? As I mentioned in what I was just saying about Lucien, she says that to Tamlin. I can't really figure you out. I feel like I can't really see who you are. And I think because that is her experience as a character, that then is our experience as a reader, because we're reading from her perspective. Even though I know where things go with Tamlin and for Tamlin, I very much am in the camp that Feyre is in, where it's like you can't really read him. What I will say that stood out to me more this time is the commentary in regard to his emotion. I think that that is intentional, that it would stand out, because it stands out to Feyre. Part of what I think starts to soften her towards Tamlin is the fact that she kind of sees this heaviness that he holds. He has this heavy responsibility. He carries a lot of this like emotion and weight on his shoulders. And even Lucien, his dialogue towards Feyre is commenting on the fact that like, well, Tamlin is brooding because we have more and more creatures getting into the lands, and he feels some kind of way about that because he should be protecting the lands and they shouldn't be getting in. And then even when he successfully kills them, he's still going to feel some kind of way about it. There's just this weight of responsibility that he cannot hide. And even in this 15th chapter where we've ended for this episode, when he goes and he finds Feyre and they're walking back to the house, she says in her inner monologue, like, I can just kind of see this like weight. He doesn't have this relief of what we've just done. Not that you would really be relieved about having to kill anything, but he doesn't feel like proud of what he's done. It just feels a little sorrowful. And obviously we're going to, continue to read on and probably get more about why that is the case. But her clocking that and internalizing that is in part building her up to him, and therefore taking down any walls that are going to be up, because she is starting to have a tiny bit more empathy for him, it seems, every interaction. And she has seen him now in a couple of instances of fighting or the aftermath of fighting, and realizing that there is a lot that he's taking on because of the nature of what's going on with their court, right? A lot of people aren't around. A lot of people have fled because of the blight that's there. And so he's taking on a lot, and it all rests with him. Now, of course, we know that it can rest with him in the sense that he can handle it because he is a high lord. And it's funny because right before we got to the part where Feyre captures the cereal and asks it about several things and then finds out that Tamlin is the high lord, right before that in the book, in her inner monologue that we read, she says something along the lines of, I wonder if the issues that Tamlin is off dealing with pertain to the High Lord of the Supreme Court. And I wonder if that High Lord had anything to do with Lucien losing his eye, and or if the woman that Lucien was speaking about is maybe an emissary to the High Lord or works with him. Like, she's kind of very quickly in a couple sentences mentioning a couple of these things. And I was like, wait a minute, Feyre doesn't know that he's the High Lord. And I realized that they had only spoken about themselves as being High Fae. So I was trying to think, like, did they never clarify that? And then, of course, I keep reading, and like the next page over, she gets the answer from the serial where she realizes, and I'm like, oh, okay, I clearly just forgot she didn't know that initially, and that she learned it in the first chapter of the serial. I guess I just say that to say that I think this is a huge turning point for her in her relationship with Tamlin, because even as he's there helping her in the aftermath, she's obviously kind of in shock and processing. She says in her inner monologue, he is the High Lord and he deemed me worthy of saving. Her processing of that information carries way more weight than if it was just High Fae. She could have had the same thought. She could have said, I still have hesitations towards him. I don't trust him. But being High Fae, he came out here, he saved me because he heard the scream, and that means something. That could have still been very plausible, but it isn't that. It's he's High Lord and he deemed me worthy of saving. Whatever she has learned over her life about High Lords and the way that they reign, she now automatically is thinking of this man differently in a matter of moments. From what she learned through this fight to this, walking back, everything has shifted for her with Tamlin. And this is kind of the beginning of that. It doesn't mean that she's going to be open right away. It's not automatically like the walls are all down, but that is the shift that's happening. So I had forgotten that, she needed to learn that information, and that she didn't automatically know when she got to the house, that it took a little bit of time, a few weeks, I guess, technically in the book's timeline for her to figure that out. But that, I do believe, leans towards being a turning point for her relationship with Tamlin. Now, as far as what the serial told Feyre, obviously the High Fae situation, and commented on all of the courts that there are. But it says you just need to stay with the High Lord and you will be safe. And don't go looking for any more information. And so she kind of repeats that to herself towards the end of this set of 15 chapters of okay, I just need to stay with the High Lord. And obviously she's also been told, you're not going to go back to your family. That's just not the situation at hand. And so she loses the hope that she had of trying to find a way to get out of this treaty. But I want to comment on the High Lord of it all, because I know from social media and many different types of videos and stuff that I've watched or seen since I first read this series, that a lot of people were commenting on the fact that the serial wasn't specific. It wasn't saying, you just need to stay with the High Lord of the Spring Court. You just need to stay with Tamlin. It just said, you need to just stay with the High Lord and you will be safe. And people were commenting on the fact that the vagueness left it open for it to be another High Lord, which you come to find out is not Tamlin in the long run of the series. I don't have a lot to say about it. It doesn't necessarily impact anything for me. I think I just want to comment that I do know that is kind of a little Easter egg. And I think those are the kinds of things that I'm interested to see how many of them I clock on this reread and how it affects my reading experience overall, because I wouldn't have known that early on, right? I am not necessarily the kind of reader that clocks the fact like, oh, the serial said stay with the High Lord of the Spring Court. I'm not necessarily the kind of reader that would have caught that would have caught or noticed the vagueness of the serial. I would have just done the same thing that Feyre did, which is like, okay, just stay with the High Lord. I wouldn't have thought about the fact that there are other courts and other High Lords. But now, obviously, I am aware of the vagueness of it and kind of this open-endedness. And so I'm interested to see if I'm able to recognize more of those things more easily on my own this time, reading through a second time. So we shall see. But overall, I honestly think that that's all that I really have to say so far. And I say that as if it's a little bit diminishing, even though I've shared a lot of thoughts here. But I think that, these 15 chapters went by pretty quick. It's you're learning a lot, but there's not a ton of world building or character development that I think has necessarily happened so far. You get the lay of the land in a pretty easy to follow way, in my opinion. And we're just chugging very much along into, the rest of the story. There's not a ton that's been laid out for us just yet, in my opinion. So that is where I'm going to leave it for our first episode of this read-along series for A Court of Thorns and Roses. I'm just really excited to be doing this and to be recording this because I never recorded the first time that I read through the series. I didn't have this podcast then. So I'm excited to be doing it now, especially knowing that new books are coming. And that's the last thing that I kind of want to comment on with this. I've mentioned this in other read-along episodes, but I think that it is really interesting that as much as I've wanted to do this read-along series, that I just kept moving forward with what I felt made sense and what I felt was more right for me as a reader and for the podcast. And it ended up being the perfect time to do the read along. I did not know specifically when other books were going to come, right? I found out with the rest of the world, of course. And so the fact that I did wait and that I didn't already have a read along recorded actually feels just like chef's kiss in just the timing and the way that the universe lined all of this up to be. So I think that that's really cool. And what I also realized the other day is that we're coming up upon the year anniversary of this podcast. While a year of episodes feels a lot when I say that, yet I haven't read a ton of books over that course of time because of the style of my podcast, right? It's not one book per episode for the most part. Some of them early on were, but it's parts of books per episode. So you could take 3, 4, 5 episodes to get through a book. So when you think of it that way, there hasn't been a ton that I've read and recorded about over that year, but to just know that we're reaching the year mark, that I have almost posted enough episodes to equate to 1 episode a week, and that I'm still enjoying this, that I still get a thrill out of reading and sharing my thoughts, that I still feel fulfilled most days in regard to this journey. It feels really cool. And in this moment, I don't know what I'm going to do for it. I want to probably just do a special kind of post to commemorate it. And I think it would be important to mark those milestones. And I'm proud of myself. And I think that my message then with that is to anybody who is doing anything because you love it, because it's a hobby, because it's an extracurricular, because it gets your cup full creatively or it gets your juices flowing creatively. Be proud of yourself. It doesn't have to be that you wait just to the year mark. It could be just because you recorded an episode or drew that day or journaled that day or built Legos that day or whatever it is. Just be proud because it matters. You are pouring into yourself some good vibes and good energy by allowing your creativity to live and to thrive. And it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter that I don't have hundreds of followers after a year. It doesn't matter that every episode hasn't been perfect. The last one that I just recorded and that went out yesterday actually was super echoey because of where I was in my house. And you know what? I tried to fix it, but at the end of the day, I just accepted my fate, and it's just a learning for me. But the point is, this has been and always will be a journey. I will be learning things every step of the way, whether I'm getting to the point of my first year or my 10th year, right? And so that is why I've always said, and if this is your first episode listening to any of my podcasts, I encourage you to go and at least listen to the very, very first, which is a context episode, where I talk about what I'm trying to do here and what the motivation for this is and what the meaning behind the message of I owe it to yourself is. And I'm very reflective about that. And so I don't know what I'm going to do or what kind of post that I'm going to do for the year mark, but I'm excited to be able to say that I've made it to that point. I'm about to make it to that point in a few weeks, and I'm proud of that. So I hope that whatever you guys are pouring into creatively and passionately, that you are proud of that as well. All of that to say, thank you so much for being here and for listening to this episode and these books and this series just really excites me. And I truly cannot wait for fall. Like, I'm a fall person through and through, but because these books are coming and we're getting more SJM, I'm so thrilled. So this all is just very, very exciting for me. So as always, please share any thoughts that you have in the YouTube comments. Are you reading for the first time? Are you doing a reread as well? If so, is it your first, or have you read these books many times? What do you feel when you come back and read this? Any and all of your thoughts, I want to see it in the comments of YouTube. Please also connect with us on Instagram, Threads, and TikTok. That is where we share schedules for when episodes are going to come out, and of course the posts saying that episodes are live. And it is helpful to have you all connected there, following along for when stuff is going to come out and engaging with our posts. So I appreciate you all. I appreciate your time. Thank you again for being here. And until next time, friends.